do think it's different. The other White Houses, it is always hard, and there's usually fits and starts, and there's usually staff shakeups relatively early.
Let's be serious. Rahm Emanuel wasn't always the most, popular guy in the building.
He was not. Sometimes effective chiefs of staffs are not the most popular people. But I think that so yes, you always have growing pains. It's really hard. It's a very small staff. It's remarkable how small the staff is. There's a lot that's put upon you. So it is normal in the beginning to have these kinds of problems, except what I think you see with this White House is this is a president that was not elected with majority of the vote and wasn't elected on an agenda. So there's nothing to fall back on. With President Clinton, he could fall back on what he was going to do for the middle class. For President Obama in his early days,
you don't think he was elected with an agenda?
I don't. What's his agenda?
His agenda was to repeal and replace Obamacare. He was going to change taxes.
He was going to fix Obamacare so that it worked for everybody. Okay. Well, as it turns out, he was not able to do that. So now what do you do? So I just think that's what's. That is, and I'm not sure they probably need more experienced staff, but that's not what they're all.
So what does he do? Because I think even it's always hard. Running the government is hard. But what does he do? He was known, Robert, as a businessman, as kind of encouraging tensions as a way to sort of get to a deal, as a sort of survivor kind of strategy. But what's going to be a successful strategy for him now? Because he's got to turn something around,
Let's remind ourselves, this president is not an ideologue. He doesn't have a lot of core beliefs except getting deals done. So he could pivot, to my earlier point before the break, he could pivot and work with the Democrats on infrastructure, on tax reform, on reforming government. Those are things that are
But how? Don't you have to take care of the infighting first?
Well,
don't you have to put everybody in their corner at some point?
I know Bob Woodward is going to write a book a year from now talking about the infighting, and the reason why is because he's done it for every single administration since Nixon to the president. We know that, okay? The point is that the president needs to look in the mirror and says, do I want to win, and do I want to be seen as a pragmatist, and do I want to run as an effective president if I run for re-election in 2020? I think this president does. Here's one thing we know about this president. He's very competitive, and he doesn't like to lose. I think what he did is he listened very artfully to Speaker Ryan when Speaker Ryan said, look, Mr. President, we need to go with health care first, then we pivot to tax reform. He listened to the Speaker, and obviously the Speaker didn't come up with a win there. I think this president's going to go right to his instincts and says, how do I figure this out in a way that gets me on the right side with the American people? I do believe that.
Alex, is there a way to sort of bring some of these competing factions together, or alternatively use that in the way he used them in business, which is just sort of, pit them against each other and hopefully, the best ideas rise to the top?
Well, if history isn't a guide, that's what he's going to continue to do. That's what he likes to do in his businesses. But here's the thing. He's got a really tough task here. He's got to corral Republicans on Capitol Hill at a time when they're looking at a president with 37% approval rating. They're thinking about their own primaries back home. They're thinking about their own re-election bids. He's got a really tough task getting people on board with his agenda right now.
And this is why, if I'm a Democrat, I see the opportunity here and I figure something out. I figure out how can I reach across the aisle, looking at this vulnerable president from a polling standpoint, and actually get some stuff done.
I think this is when the Democrats look at how weak he is and say, this is when we press on Russia. This is when we really try to advance.
Well, you wrote you wrote an op-ed, and we're circling back in one way to Jared Kushner, because it is all about the Russia thing, and you wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, and you basically said, if the Democrats would just say, this is a threat to our democracy, this is a threat to our republic, the American people would listen. Well, why aren't they doing it then?
I think you do see that happening more, and you saw, I thought, Senator Warner.
But too little, too late?
I think for Hillary Clinton, it is. And this is something I wrote about, that I think that even it was such a crazy campaign and so unconventional as just covering Trump for people. The idea of the press wrapping their heads around the idea of how deeply involved that we know Russia actually was in trying to influence our election was
But going forward, how do Democrats take advantage of that?
I think that they have to. I think that I think the more you talk about it, the more the press will. The public will pay attention to it. And now that he is actually president, you're in a much different situation where we had a hard time people caring about it. But this is President of the United States that was elected with a semi-hostile state interfering in our election to assist him. I still feel like we are slumbering through this process. Not only do I believe if Hillary Clinton were president, there'd be impeachment hearings. I believe if George Bush were president, and this happened under George Bush, we would all be talking about impeachment hearings, because we took George Bush seriously, and we do not take this president seriously enough. We have a soft complicity of low expectations. We don't expect a lot of him, and we're not taking the Russian thing seriously because we think, oh, well, maybe it helps him, maybe it didn't. We don't really know. What does it really matter? This is a semi-hostile state interfering with our elections. There couldn't be anything more important. And I think Republicans, Democrats are doing a good bit in Congress on this, but I really think what they should do is hit Republicans at home about it. You know, if you are the Republicans that talk about leaks as opposed to wanting to get to the bottom of how Russia did, they are helping prop up the Kremlin. They are doing what the Kremlin wants them to do.
Are they?
And that's what I think Democrats should be doing now.
Here's what we know. Vladimir Putin is a foe, not a friend. He is trying to destabilize the European Union financially. He is trying to destabilize NATO from a military standpoint. He is trying, to her point, trying to manipulate our democratic freedoms. We know that. So it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. If you're an American and if you love this country as much as everyone does, you would stand up and say, this is wrong. We need to push back very strongly on this because this is a very threat to our freedoms.
And by the way, the banker that now has brought Jared Kushner back into the public eye is from a bank that was under sanctions under the Obama administration because of